Thank you everyone for attending today. I'm just going to get my slides up on the screen and make them go big. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our webinar sponsors for keeping this free for everyone. As Ruby said, the recording will be available afterwards from the ASAPbio website, and the slides will also be available afterwards as well. Today we've got about 644 people registered, which is fantastic. And the registrants come from around 60 countries, 51% of which being in the UK and US. This represents about 450 organisations around the world, 40% of which are academic librarians, 25% are publishers, and the remainder have an academic background. I've got 5 amazing panellists today, and I'm just going to give you a very quick brief background to preprint peer review, which I will try and pronounce well, but I'm probably going to roll over those P's a lot. And then I will give time for the panelists and what is going to be a really, really great Q&A. So just to introduce you to some of the background here. There have been a lot of technological advances in the past 30 years. I remember just before the internet came around. And the thing is, despite all these technological advances, journal publication is actually taking longer than ever. So you can see in this first graph here, the time it takes to get your first author paper has increased by a year from the 1970s up to 2012 to 2014. And every year that just increases more. There's also been a big increase in the number of panels required in a publication. So we've got Cell, Nature, and the Journal of Cell Biology here as examples. So between 1984 and 2014, you can see the big change here, and this is not just in the number of panels required, but there's this thing called supplemental material, which suddenly started appearing as well. And you can see in almost all cases, it's actually bigger than the number of panels in original articles from the 1980s. And this really impacts early career researchers in particular. And because this is all about peer review, this is the only figure I could really find about the cost of peer review, but it's estimated that peer review globally costs about $6 billion, which I'm sure you'll all agree is a lot of money. And therefore, there's a real incentive and a real need to move away from this traditional system that we seem to have trapped ourselves in. And one of the answers to this system are preprints. And this is because they enable rapid, low-cost dissemination of research findings. What we've got here in the bottom is the normal traditional manuscript life cycle. So you have your manuscript, you submit it to a journal. That journal may or may not send it out for peer review. Let's assume you get death rejected. And then you send it to a second journal. Now, normally if you send it to a second journal, that might get out for peer review. You will then either revise your work based on peer review comments, or the peer reviewers will decide it's not suitable for that journal, so you send it to another journal, and this can repeat until eventually you have 3 or more very happy reviewers, at which point your paper finally comes out and is available to the public. This process takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months up to years. I know someone who took 10 years once to publish a bit of work. In contrast, preprints, you take your manuscript, you submit it to a preprint server, and within 48 hours of doing so, your work is out there for the public, and you can get community feedback, you can have a discussion with people about your work. And this is where a lot of these services we're going to talk to today will actually come in. So what is a preprint? Preprints are not peer reviewed by the server before posting, and this enables them to be posted very, very rapidly. They are versioned and can be very easily updated or corrected. And I'm sure we all have that familiarity with publishing a paper and then suddenly you find all of your typos in the paper when it's too late to do anything about it. Preprints are also compatible with almost all journals now. There's links here to websites you can check to see the compatibility, but there are very few journals that will not accept preprints. Preprints are also citable. They receive a DOI, they're indexed by EuroPMC, for example, and search tools often pool citations between preprints and their subsequent journal articles. So Google Scholar is a good example of something that does that. The other thing that we're now seeing is a lot of funders consider preprints as evidence of productivity in grants and reports, as do hiring committees. And again, that really gets back to the benefit of being an early career researcher using preprints. So preprint adoption for the life sciences has a complicated history. And what we're going to do here is just start from 2013. So in 2013, bioRxiv was released to the world. And from there, really, we've seen a huge increase in the number of preprints posted in relation to the life sciences. Currently, the preprint sits about 10% of the biomedical literature published each month, according to EuroPMC data. The other things you're seeing on this graph here are some just key events that have happened in the preprint world. Most recently, eLife, of course, changing their model, which is now focused entirely on reviewing preprints. And one thing we found consistently when we survey preprint authors is that authors want feedback. So the top data here is from a slightly older survey compared to the bottom data, but both show the same thing, which is that a large number of people who post preprints want that feedback, and they want early feedback too. And this doesn't matter what country the authors are from, it's a universal need that authors are all wanting. Now, we know peer reviewers can act as gatekeepers, and we all have stories of horrible reviewer number 2. But the thing is, peer reviewers don't have to act like gatekeepers. They can be collaborators. And this data here is a little bit old now, but this is data that we did alongside Review Commons to survey authors who had had peer review experiences with Review Commons. The takeaway here is that for the most part, reviewers were really, really happy with the experience they had. And I just want to highlight 2 points here, which is that reviews were collegial and reviews proposed reasonable and achievable experiments and edits. These 2 points in particular got a very, very positive response compared to traditional peer review. And this, of course, is something we're all familiar with and feeds into a lot of the negative experiences people can have in academia. So open peer review has a lot more benefits than just speeding up the peer review process. And just talking about preprint peer review, this has also been growing over time. So this graph is starting from 2017, and what you're seeing here this is data from Society, and it's the number of reviewed preprints each month. It goes up to early this year, so February 2023. And you see that this is increasing in a great track. So towards the middle and end of last year, we were seeing over 200 preprints reviews being posted every month. And that is great, that's great growth. But it's not just growth in preprint reviews that we're seeing over the past few years. We've also seen the whole feedback ecosystem kind of explode. So preprint servers themselves have increased in number. We kind of started with bioRxiv and a couple of others, and we've got over 50 plus now. You're going to hear from some of the brilliant people who are part of the preprint feedback initiatives today, and there's a lot of those. And also we're seeing an increase in the services that offer linking and discovery of preprints and preprint feedback. So these are things like Crossref and doc maps. So the whole ecosystem around this is now growing at a really great rate, as is the recognition of preprint peer review. So we've got data here showing that doctoral schools are accepting preprints as an output that is at the same quality as a published article. We've got refereed preprints being recognized for EMBO fellowships, and I know this extends to other fellowships as well from other funders. And so as the recognition gets in place, we would expect to see more people engage in preprint peer review and therefore using preprints. And before I hand it off to the panelists, I just kind of want to leave you on this slide here. So this is a press release from the European Union earlier this year, and it very much echoes something we've seen from the US. And that is there is now a top-down approach from government bodies to really promote transparent, open, equitable access to scholarly data and results. The European Commission here were calling for open access with no costs for authors or readers and promoting non-profit publishing models. And I want to highlight this because preprints and preprint peer review fits brilliantly into addressing this. And so with that, we have 5 brilliant speakers, and I'm going to hand over to Sara from EMBO, who's going to talk about Review Commons.
Hello everybody. Thanks a lot to OASPA for this nice invitation. My name is Sara Monaco, and I'm the managing editor of Review Commons. So Review Commons is, like similarly to other initiatives that you will see today, a platform that offers peer review of preprints. So this is a project that has been launched around 3.5 years ago by EMBO and ASAPbio, and at the moment it is supported by EMBO and HHMI. Next slide, please. So why did we started Review Commons in the first place? So our main goal was to accelerate access to peer-reviewed research, both in terms of reviewed preprints and in terms of published papers. So we strongly believe in the value of reviewed preprints as a research output per se. And we are committed to, like a mission together with some of the other panelists, in making reviewed preprints more and more recognized. But at the same time, we wanted to also tackle one of the main problems of the current publishing system, which is redundant peer review of the same manuscript at different journals. So to eliminate the need of multiple cycles of peer review, we have partnered with a consortium of journals that is expanding now and that you see displayed here, that all agreed to consider our reviews without starting the peer review process from scratch. Next slide. So how does it work? So the preprints that we receive are subjected to an initial editorial selection that we do in consultation with our academic advisory board. And the preprints that pass this selection, which are around 80%, are subjected to journal agnostic peer review. Journal agnostic peer review means that we ask our reviewers to articulate their peer review in a way that it is focused exclusively on the scientific content of the preprint without having any particular journal fit or standard in mind. So these reviews are then sent to the authors, who can then transfer these reviews together with their responses to the reviewers on bioRxiv and medRxiv together with their original preprint to create a reviewed preprint, which is the first outcome of Review Commons, and the authors can also stop here if they want. But since we know that many authors still want or need to publish on a journal, we facilitate the transfer of these reviewed preprints to one of the journals of our consortium. And the key feature of Review Commons is that if the first journal rejects the manuscript, it can be transferred again to a second journal using the same set of reviews. And this is possible multiple times in our system. And this is how we eliminate multiple cycles of peer reviews, because since the reviews are journal agnostic, they are portable across different journals. So hopefully after revision, the paper can also get published in one of our journals. So our process is journal agnostic, but it also remains journal compatible. Next slide. So in conclusion, with Review Commons, we are trying to create synergies between the world of open science and preprints and the world of scientific publishing by contributing to a faster dissemination of scientific findings through reviewed preprints, and also contributing to a more efficient publishing system. So with this, I conclude and I give the microphone to the next speaker.
Thank you. So next up we have Thomas from Peer Community In.
Thank you very much. So my name is Thomas Guillemaud. I am a co-founder of Peer Community In, PCI. I'm going to try to explain you what it is. So PCI is an organization that tries to organize communities of researchers handling the evaluation through peer review and recommending preprints in their scientific field. So basically we evaluate preprints that are in bioRxiv, arXiv, OSF preprints, etc. And we have specific PCIs in specific thematics like PCI ecology, PCI genomics, PCI microbiology, etc. So we have 17 different PCIs like that in science technique and in social sciences. And we have the support of many universities, also libraries and national research institutions. And I will speak about that later. So next slide, please. So how does it work? Basically, when an author is happy with their articles. They can deposit them in, they can deposit the preprint in the preprint server, but they also have to deposit the data, the scripts and the codes in other open archives. And then they can make a submission to one of the PCIs. So for instance, PCI ecology. And there will be an editor handling the manuscript and organizing the peer review process. And based on at least 2 peer reviews, they will make an editorial decision. And this editorial decision can be to revise the manuscript so that there will be subsequent successive versions of the manuscript on the preprint server. And they can reach a final editorial decision like reject the article or accept the article. And if they accept the article, then we ask the authors to post a final version of their preprint on the preprint server with a specific format so that it's obvious for the readers that the article has been peer-reviewed, it has been recommended, it is a final, valid, citable article that is available. And we also publish on the PCI website a recommendation text signed by the editor. This text explains the reasons why the article has been accepted, so the qualities of the article, the context, etc. And we also publish all the editorial process. And this is published only in the case of an acceptance of the article. So next slide, please. So at the end of the process, you have this PCI recommended article, which is citable, final, which is valid, but the authors may have may want to publish their article in a journal. So we offer this possibility to the authors. So they have the choice to transfer directly the article to peer community journal that belongs to PCI also, which is a Diamond Open Access journal. And this is a direct publication with no further peer review, okay? They also have the possibility to submit their article to one of the many PCI-friendly journals with which we have some commitment. So they, for instance, 42 of them commit to accept the articles that are recommended by PCI with no further peer review. And almost 40 of them also can give a fast response to a pre-submission inquiry. And the authors, if they want, have the third possibility, which is just to submit the article to other journals, any other journals which accept the submissions of preprints. And an important thing here is that it's the red arrow. So if the authors are not satisfied with the decision of the journal, they can go back to the beginning of the loop and they can choose again, for instance, the peer community journal or another PCI-friendly journal or another journals among any other journals. And they can do that repeatedly. So with the same evaluation process, you can use several times the evaluation process for different journals. So next slide, please. So with all of this, we have some unique features. There is a submission by the authors, and this may be different in other systems. The data, the scripts, and the code must be shared to be evaluated by PCI. We produce some editorial decision with acceptance or rejection, and we publish only the acceptance decision. We also publish a recommendation text in case of acceptance. A recommended preprints, we consider that it's a final and usable article, but the publication in a journal is still possible if necessary. And for that, evaluations can be transferred to any journals, including the PCI-friendly journals. And the PCI recommended preprints can be directly published in the peer community journal, which is in Diamond Open Access. And PCI is supported by many research institutions, and we have more than 100 supports from libraries, national research institutes, universities, and this allows to secure a budget for the next 10 years. So I'm going to pass in the chat the contacts to which you can write to contact us, and also the URL of the PCI, general PCI website, if you want to contact us, to have a look, and to have more details if you are interested to join the effort. Thank you very much. And with that, I've finished and I pass the voice to the next speaker. Thank you.
So next up we have Stefano and from Rapid Reviews. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Stefano.
Thank you very much, Jonny. So my name is Stefano Bertozzi, and I'm on the faculty at UC Berkeley, and I'm the editor of Rapid Reviews Infectious Diseases. We started at the beginning of the pandemic as Rapid Reviews COVID-19, an initiative of the MIT Press. And the idea was to provide rapid reviews of manuscripts that were being posted on preprint servers and being acted upon by policymakers, by other researchers, and by medical professionals in advance of any peer review. And so while we, in theory, can go on to publish manuscripts, as you've just heard from Thomas, in fact, we have not done that. We focus on publishing peer reviews of manuscripts. And the big difference between our initiative and the ones that you've heard about already is that we went out looking for manuscripts ourselves and not depending upon authors submitting their manuscripts to us for peer review. So while most of our work is focused on validating what we think is interesting and valid science that needs to be disseminated and acted upon either by other scientists or policymakers, clinicians, or whatever, some of the times we intentionally debunk science that is being paid attention to in the public sphere and that is not valid science and requires peer review so that people can understand why they shouldn't believe the conclusions of a particular manuscript. We do notify our authors, but we don't depend upon their agreement to review something. So the way we work is quite different because we work with a pyramid of student support. So we're right now university-based. We are in the process of expanding with a number of partnerships with universities in low and middle income countries to try to broaden our model to a more global model. But what we do is we have teams of students across 5 different domain areas. So we have the medical sciences, biological and chemical sciences, physical sciences and engineering, social sciences and humanities, and public health. So 2 years after the start of the epidemic in the summer of last year, we broadened our scope from rapid reviews COVID-19 to rapid reviews infectious diseases, but we maintain this very broad disciplinary focus. We have teams of students in each of those disciplines who scour the preprint servers, the ones you've heard about, and other ones like SSRN for social science, or NBER for economics, or PsycArchive, et cetera, and identify manuscripts that they feel warrant peer review. They do that in domain meetings. We come together every week where they pitch to me and to other associate editors the manuscripts that they feel are highest priority for their domain to send out for peer review. And then we work with students to identify peer reviewers. And we do that not because of the networks of the editors, but through a process where we identify nearest neighbor papers. We look at the authors of nearest neighbor papers. We look at the other publications of those nearest neighbor papers, and then the students make recommendations, which then the editors review and approve, and then proceed with a peer review process. And as I say, we're in the process of looking for partnerships with other institutions to broaden the number of students and mentors who do this. We provide typically academic credit for the students who participate and pay a small number of administrative support. So with that, I'll turn it back. Jonny, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steph. I actually had some work go through rapid reviews when I was doing my COVID work. Okay, over to Daniela with pre-review.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela Saderi. I'm the co-founder and director of PREreview. PREreview is an open project fiscally sponsored by Code for Science and Society. So we operate as a nonprofit. And our mission is to bring more openness and equity to the scholarly peer review process via the engagement of anyone who wishes to bring constructive contributions to Preprints to the world and share it with everybody. So we really believe that the role of peer reviewers should not be definitely the one of gatekeepers, but it should be open to anyone who has a constructive attitude. And we also work at redefining what that expertise and expert means, and particularly thinking about how can we train and the next generation of peer reviewers in a way that is conscious of social issues and can be more, and then their contributions is what actually makes them experts in peer review. Next slide, please. So we run an open source platform, the OpenReview platform, in which any researcher with an ORCID ID can contribute to constructive feedback. There is also a request feature for feedback that is coming back. We are currently overhauling a lot of key features as we received new funding as of last year. We also run training programs in the form of workshops and also some mentoring programs that have paired early career researchers with editors. We do this in collaboration with organizations and institutions, and once a quarter we also run a free mentoring program for anyone who signs up. The other thing that we do is that we organize what we call live stream preprint journal clubs, which are calls like this one, in which we review a preprint and then we help the group put together a review that is written collaboratively and publish it on PREreview. We have one of those tomorrow in collaboration with a journal, an open access journal called Current Research in Neurobiology. We have done that also with Jamir Publications. Next slide, please. Oh, well, it's just an animation here, and just to remind us that the capacity building projects that we do, such as the mentoring and training programs and the Life Cycle Journal Club, for us are really key to build capacity and to host then the results of these projects on our platform. So our platform is kind of the home for us to create this community of belonging. Next slide. We recently relaunched the website with new features, new look. And what I'm particularly proud of is that we have been doing this with constant and active feedback and input from the community. We've hosted so far more than four sprints and about, I think, 10 one-on-one interviews for which we compensate your feedback. So if you would like to talk to us and let us know your needs, we're here to listen. You can find I'll give you in the chat some information to reach to us. So next slide, please. This is just an example. So as I mentioned, anyone with an ORCID ID can publish a review on PREreview, and they can do so using their ORCID associated name. In this case, I just put one of the latest PREreviews by Dr. Gary McDowell, but you can also publish a review using a unique pseudonym that is associated with your PREreview profile. And what that does is that it gives you a sort of anonymity unless you share the pseudonym with someone else, but it keeps you accountable. And so we still are able to enforce our code of conduct by, if there is a violation, by tracing back to the ORCID ID profile and possibly blocking a bad actor. But so far, we have never had to do that. Our reviews get DOIs that are stored on Zenodo with associated metadata, metadata that links them to the preprints, metadata that we're constantly updating to match the current standards. And they're also licensed as CC BY 4.0, so citable and by anyone who wants to reproduce them. Then next slide. I just want to mention one quick update because I'm very excited about this. Just an announcement that went out on Wednesday. So we are partnering with eLife and Society to bring Core Notify to our communities. And what this protocol will do is to connect, better connect authors, editors, and community reviewers. The first use case is this one we call author-driven requests. So soon authors that submit to bioRxiv and then medRxiv and then Cielo preprints will be able to request feedback from pre-reviewers. And then the reviewers will get notifications according to some different workflows that we have to set up, but they can respond to those requests, and then the review will be published alongside the preprints. Next slide. The second use case that we're very excited about is also the ability, the Core Notify, to give us this connection with editors who may want to request feedback from our community. PREreview will be the first one to try out this, and the goal for Society is also to bring this connections, both the author-driven request and the journal-driven request, to all groups that are currently running on Society. And next slide. Yeah, thank you so much. I will put in the chat some links to join our newsletter and also our new community Slack, in which every week we have prompts and we solicit input from you all. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Thank you, Daniela. So next over we have Lesley from Science Colab.
Thank you very much, Jonny. So my name is Lesley Anson. I'm facilitating the work of Science Colab, which is a community-driven open science publishing initiative. And I'd like to start by saying it's really encouraging to see how many initiatives there are in this space at the moment. So next slide, please. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Biophysics Colab, which is the first community endeavor of Science Colab. And we decided to start with biophysics purely because that was the expertise of all the founding members of Science Colab. So it was an obvious thing to do. And we've been experimenting with preprint review for about 2 years now. We're currently in a transition period. So by the end of this year, we are going to be extending our service to a full publish, review, curate, or PRC service. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about today. And this graphic here, I hope you can read that okay, but that shows the rudiments of our PRC workflow. And the idea of this workflow is that it puts authors in control of the publication of their work. So they choose when to publish their work as a preprint. They submit their preprint to our service for peer review. We provide them with a report. The authors consider the advice that we give. The authors revise their preprint as they see fit. They may ask for another round of peer review. They may not. Or they decide at that point that their revised preprint is the final version of their preprint. And at this point, what we do is we publish an evaluation statement, which is an assessment of the work using vocabulary rather than using metrics. So we explain what is shown in the work, why it's interesting, perhaps what the limitations may be, and who it will interest. We don't make any binary accept or reject judgments of the work. And the second thing we do is we offer the authors an option to create a version of record, which is what we call a curated article. And it's just like a journal article, indexed in the usual way. So authors can choose to create a version of record with us, or they can choose to submit their work and publish a version of record with another, perhaps more traditional journal. And that's possible because all this activity that's described in this workflow, the preprint itself, our peer review report, the author's response to that report, and our evaluation, it's all made publicly available as the process moves forward. So next slide, please, Jonny. So I think that the interesting features of this model, as I've explained in the previous slide, is that it puts authors in control of their research outputs by choosing when to publish, how to revise, and where to create the version of record. What I didn't explain is that what we aim to do is provide the very best author service. And I like to emphasize the word service here. So what we're not doing is acting as gatekeepers. So we have curators rather than editors. Our curators are working scientists who create a reviewing team of experts in the field. And this reviewing team collaborate to produce a single report to pass on to the authors. So in other words, the views of maybe 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 reviewers will be consolidated into one high quality report. And that report outlines the suggestions that the reviewers have raised to improve the rigor of the study. And these are all suggestions that all the reviewers have agreed upon. And what we also do is we make it clear which points the reviewing team feel are essential and which points we are just, we feel are just optional things that they may want to address. The report is journal agnostic, so the goal is to help authors and not create barriers. So our aim is to provide constructive, collegial advice that's non-judgmental. And what we're also aiming to do is to create a publishing environment that provides a better foundation for research assessment down the line. So we're aiming for equitability. We're intending to incorporate as a non-profit organization. We haven't incorporated yet, but that's what we will do. Our service is currently free. In the future, we may need to charge for the service, but it will be the minimal charge that we could possibly offer. And some of the costs that we will be charging for are actually to pay our curators and our reviewers for their time and expertise. Which we feel is the only fair thing to do, given the amount of effort that these people put into peer review. We're striving for inclusivity amongst our curators and our reviewers, and ultimately we'd like to be able to ensure that that inclusivity also applies to all authors, so everybody around the world will be able to submit to the service. And when we say inclusivity, we're talking gender, geographic, ethnic, age, all sorts of different types of inclusivity. So amongst our team, we have no hierarchy. We actually embed early career researchers, students, postdocs in the entire process. They help us to identify preprints. They join our reviewing teams. And hopefully they gain enough experience to become curators themselves. We're also trying to create transparency by making all stages of our process publicly available for all the preprints that we review. So all the consolidated reports will be published, the author responses will all be published, all finalized preprints will have an evaluation statement, and we will offer all authors the option to create a version of record. And each of these items will have their own DOI. So, the reports can be cited by others as well as the preprint itself or the version of record itself. And we're also delighted that 95% of our reviewers so far have been given have chosen to sign the consolidated reports. So they've all been given the choice to sign, and 95% have agreed to sign the report. And that includes our early career researchers and in some cases, including PhD students. So there, I think the interesting features of our service. And Jonny, if you could show the next slide, please. Just 2 words really. We're a very new organization. What's next? Well, we're going to continue to innovate. We're currently trying to incorporate journal clubs into our peer review process, developing the way we curate the finalized preprints and the versions of record. We'd like to forge new collaborations with different communities, so launch new collabs, and each of those communities will be able to modify our template workflow in a way that works for them. We hope to create a regenerative business model that positively benefits the scientific community and creates a better environment for publishing research. And ultimately, our vision is of a publishing ecosystem in which the significance of research findings are recognized independently of publication venue. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can now open it up to the Q&A part of this. And I can see the Q&As are lighting up, but I'm going to use my chair authority to jump in with my question first. So we've just ended with talk of potential charges in the future. And one of the things I have noticed in the Q&As has been asked already is the costs of peer review and if any of the services currently charge fees or plan to charge fees in the future.
I can start answering to that. So at the moment, Review Commons is completely for free to authors and also to journals, because actually we are also providing a service not only to the authors, but also to the journals. And at the moment we are supported by grants. So this is been working nicely in this pilot phase, but of course we can envision that, in the future we have to have a more sustainable business model. So, I mean, our idea is actually to charge at some point, not the authors, because the authors are already paying the APC of the journals, but in somehow to have the contribution of the journal themselves. That can be either a financial contribution or an in-kind contribution, meaning that they would help like running the platform in terms of workforce. So to offer like their staff for helping us with peer review.
Thomas?
Yeah, so at PCI, we are not going to charge the authors for the work we do, for the peer reviews and for the evaluation. We have an economic model that is helped by fundings from universities. I already told that during my talk, but universities, libraries, national research organizations like the CNRS in France or INRAE, and they all participate with a tiny amount of money, but there are a lot, okay, a lot of them. So it's like a consortial membership. We could say that, even if it's not really a membership, it's like a consortial donations, things like that. And these secure a real budget, and we are okay and very confident for at least the 10 next years. And basically the peer review work is a work that we think is organized and has to be done by scientists, and it's part of their work. So we think that we should not ask any charge for that. So this is the philosophy of PCI concerning this. Thank you.
Steph?
No, there's no charge because, as I mentioned before, we don't even ask for permission. So it would be impossible to charge people who are not even submitting their work to us. I think that this question, though, raises the broader question of how sustainable are these efforts and how in the future. And I think that that's really something we want to get to in discussion. Because I think that as we transition from a world in which peer review is all conducted by for-profit publishers to a different world, the one that we're living in, then where the money comes from is really important, even to run the process, to say nothing about paying peer reviewers.
Daniela?
Yeah, we don't charge. So primarily, we don't charge anyone in the sense of we don't charge users, and we don't plan to ever do that. Obviously we don't charge authors because the same. We don't actually. There's no permission asked there. But I want to say that the primary funding is philanthropies right now. We're trying to move to a model in which we can get more support, like a peer community and more kind of small donations from participants, in this landscape. We do charge for when we partner with organizations for running peer review for their reviewers, and we do charge when we partner with journals and organizations to run the live stream Preprint Journal Club, but those are very small amounts that kind of pay for small amount of our operations. Mostly is philanthropies.
And Lesley, I don't know if you wanted to add anything in from what you said.
Yes, I mean, I don't think that there's too much I can add. Only it is how we move forward in this space financially is in a sustainable way is a big question. We're not sure. We don't plan to charge for for a little while yet. We're lucky to have support that's enabling us to offer this service currently for free, but there's clearly longer term questions, and we think we will need to charge in the future. But what we would like to do is we're trying to create a platform that is extremely low cost to run, and so that the effort is on behalf of the curators and the reviewers, and so any charges that we apply would be used to pay those individuals. So it's although we're charging, we're putting that money back into the community. But this is to be determined in the future.
Thank you. So I'm going to group some of the questions into one question as well. And that kind of comes back to the idea of trust and peer review. So how does a reader know that you can trust the peer reviews or peer review services? We'll start at the beginning of Sara.
I don't think we heard what you said. You started with?
Sorry. So how does the average reader know that they can trust a preprint peer review or peer review service? Sara?
I just didn't hear you. You said you start. I can start. Okay, so the element of trust is a very important one for us. I think it's both that trust, the trust of a reader and who reads the review and where does it come from, but there's also the trust of new communities that we want to engage in, trusting that their contribution will be valued. But that said, I think that for us, it's about reading the reviews and it's making your own decisions for now and trusting the contribution to the community and values that we hold in these communities, and the code of conduct will be enforced. But I think we are exploring with other community members what are additional indicators of trust that go beyond like, oh, that institution, that person comes from Harvard, therefore we should trust this review. So I think it's very important to be careful with what are the indicators of trust and how can we move past prestige that oftentimes is what's listed as an element of trust. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to jump in on that?
In our case, actually, the peer review is done in a way that is like more similar to what happens in journals, including the fact that the peer review is run by professional editors. So actually, of course, Review Commons have the privilege, to count on the expertise of all EMBO Press editors, and so the manuscripts are assigned to editors specialized on a certain field, that they know the field, and actually, it's they will like look for reviewers more or less with the same criteria that they will use with their own journal. So of course, this is like still like a measure of trust, but it does not is like not completely conclusive. But this is what we use.
Thomas?
Yeah, so maybe at PCI we have several tools to try to guarantee trust from the readers. The first thing is that we check very carefully the conflict of interest between the authors, the editors, and the reviewers, and this is very, very important for us. One of the other thing is that we are transparent because we publish the editorial process, including the peer reviews at the end. So this is very important because we are not going to publish things that are not okay. So we have to be sure that it's okay. And also the editors, they are going to sign a recommendation text. So they have the responsibility in their name to be sure that the peer reviews are trustable and are of good quality. And this is also very important. And there is a last thing, which is it's not unique, but it's not very frequent, is that we just absolutely forbid the existence of financial conflict of interest in the articles that we evaluate. So we are not managing the financial conflict of interest, we are forbidding it. And this is very specific because we have many authors that complain about that because they cannot submit the article to PCI, but it's the rule at PCI, it's like that. So it's just another tool that we have. This is it.
Steph?
I mean, it's difficult. I think that we try to essentially identify peer reviewers that have no conflict of interest and have the appropriate scientific credentials and the appropriate body of published work to make them appropriate peer reviewers for a particular manuscript. The fact that, I don't know the exact number, but let's say 97, 98% of our peer reviewers are open, and therefore people can go search them and look at their profile page and look at their other publications. lets the reader assess for themselves whether the peer reviewer is competent to review the manuscript. Otherwise, as other people have suggested, it really depends on the reputation of the initiative and of their editorial team, just as it does with a journal. This is something which I think I'm really interested in increasing use of AI tools to help us with these sort of measures of credibility. And so, for example, we're getting help from Semantic Scholar to identify conflict of interest, whether the peer reviewer not only is not a co-author of the paper, but has not previously published or in recent years published with any of the authors of the paper. We tend not to use any peer reviewers from the private sector. We tend to look, so there's a number of things that we do to try to reduce the probability of conflicts of interest and increase the quality of the reviewers. But I think it's a problem we all share, is how do you get that credibility with your readers?
And Lesley?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to make the general point that I think this is an area where, you know, preprint review is it's a great model for transparency, and through that transparency, I think readers can judge for themselves, you know, whether or not the process itself is trustworthy. So, you know, by making all the reports available, and, you know, in cases where the editors, or in our case, curators and reviewers sign the reports, then, you know, I think that transparency allows readers to, you know, to determine for themselves whether or not they can trust that report. Reading the report, reading the details that the reviewers raised, I think gives you a really good indication of how careful the review process was, and, you know, and therefore, as a result of that, how trustworthy the work actually is.
So we've also had a few questions that are coming back to data that you might have. So we've had a couple of people ask if you have any data that shows your processes are actually speeding up the sort of peer review timeline, and also if you have data on who is actually using preprint peer review. So that might be the authors or the peer reviewers themselves. I'm going to start in reverse order, so we'll start with Lesley.
We don't have much data, I'm afraid, but, you know, anecdotally, we know of several instances where we believe that the publication of our report on a particular preprint supported the publication of that work in a traditional journal. So, you know, we don't know for sure, of course, but you know, hopefully that might have you know, prevented that work from being rejected by that journal and then having to transfer to a new journal and beginning the process again. But these are very anecdotal reports. We don't, our experiment so far has been very small scale, so we just don't have the numbers to be able to form any conclusions, I'm afraid.
Daniela?
Sorry, I was typing responses in the chat. Can you repeat the question real quick?
Do you have any data on whether your process speeds up peer review, or if who's using it?
Right. No, in terms of let me think. Like, I think we're not collected. We've collected anecdotal data, but it would be really interesting to, once we get, you know, better fitted in this standardized doc maps, hopefully world, and core notify world, to actually quantify that. So we're looking at what is the metadata that we need to absolutely have in order to track that. But besides anecdotal data, we don't have any hard data on that.
Steph?
Same. I think it's a really good question. We do track when the manuscripts that we review are published, and we, you know, even if we don't have a pair of peer reviews, if something is published, then I'll go ahead and post an initial review and stop looking for reviewers for something that is published. But, and as I think most of our listeners will know, it's highly variable when people post something to a preprint server. Sometimes they do it when they know an article has been accepted, and they're just doing it as a way of providing public access. And other times they do it and spend a long time on the preprint server before they ever submit to a journal. So it's highly variable.
Thomas?
Yeah, so we have data on that. So basically, we are not speeding up the process of peer review because for instance, the median time to first decision is about 50 days. So it's comparable or similar to what you can find in many journals. But there is the fact that the complete evaluation process until publication, this can be really different in PCI, and the process can be speed up because with the same evaluation process, you can try different journals. You can publish directly in the peer community journal. So it means that if you are sure, so there are two cases. If you are sure that you are going to publish your article as is with a single round of peer review in the journal of your first choice, then go there and do not go to PCI. If you have a doubt, if you think that maybe you are a bit ambitious, etc., maybe in this case, it's interesting for you to go to PCI because you will have the possibility to use different journals with the same evaluation process.
Thank you. And Sara?
Yeah, it's very similar to what Thomas just said, also in Review Commons. So we have data, and actually, the time that it takes for us to complete the peer review process is similar to what we have at EMBO Press, which is like 30-40 days. But actually what it really speed up is like the time that it takes for the entire reviewed preprint to be online. So the time that it takes for like a reviewed article to be available to the scientific community. And so we estimated that it takes around 70 days, the entire process. So from submission to like posting of reviewed preprints, while for like a published manuscript, as you know, it can take like months and if not more.
Thank you. So we've got a lot of questions, but we're also out of time. So thank you to all of our wonderful panelists who are still typing away furiously to answer your questions. And I will hand back over to Ruby.
Thank you very much, Jonny, and thank you once again to all of our panelists. Thanks also goes to our wonderful sponsors for supporting our webinar series. This webinar will be open for the next 2 minutes to allow you to grab any resources and links. And as I mentioned at the start, the recording and resources as well as slides will be available on the ASAPbio webinar in the coming days, and we shall let you know when. So thank you again for joining us, and a big thank you to our sponsors as well. Thank you, everyone.